Hello there, ninth graders. This is Teacher Krishna, and welcome to our biology class for week number 17. Just like always, thank you for coming to the online lesson and for completing the assignments that you will have today. And we have to follow some simple instructions, just like every week. Log into Agilix, enter to the Google Classroom, download the Word document, and save it in your biology folder. Of course, you have to name it as it is specified right below. As we move, remember to take notes on the Word document. That is going to help you to keep track of the most essential things from this presentation and YouTube video. It is very important to start with our end in mind. So for topic 3.03, the end in mind is the following. Describes the patterns of inheritance that Mendel's data revealed by summarizing Mendel's law of segregation, so that he and she can explain how there can be many variations of one gene and complete the module assessment correctly. Make sure to keep track of the end in mind in your Word document. Now, we have the picture of this beautiful cat. Probably you might see something a little bit different in him. So, this picture and this cat is related to Mendel and the theory of segregation and the theory of genetics that he investigated. So we will start off with a question. Do you know anyone that is polydactyl? Polydactyl means someone with an extra toe or finger. So if you were careful enough to notice what's going on with this beautiful kitten in there, you might have noticed that he has extra toes. So if we count, he does not have 5, but he has 6 toes, or even he has 7 sometimes. And what is interesting is that this polydactyl gene is a dominant gene, while having 5 fingers, which is mostly what's normal, is a gene that is recessive. Later on, we're going to analyze what is a dominant gene and what is a recessive gene. But just to give you a perspective on what it is, a dominant gene is something that is constantly present. And a recessive gene is something that is not as present as a dominant gene. Okay, let's continue. So this person right here is Gregor Mendel, and he is the scientist that is well known for conducting the first experiments related to genetics. So Gregor Mendel was an Australian monk. He was born in 1822. He studied science and mathematics in the University of Vienna. He was a priest and he spent 14 years as a teacher for high school at a monastery. And he was in charge of the monastery garden, so he conducted his experiments in there. So basically what Gregor Mendel did when he conducted his experiments was that he used some plants that were specifically peas. So he experimented with the genetics of peas, and he started to notice that there were certain variations that will come along with different generations. Of course, among time and among crossing their genes within each other. We're going to analyze a little bit about his experiments right now. So Mendel's experiment. He proved that several characteristics were inherited from parents to their offspring. So this was a theory that was already present before Mendel. And a lot of scientists theorize that actually parents can inherit their genes or their genetic material to their offspring. But they noticed that in some cases that did not really apply so well. Because let's suppose that there are two parents, one with brown eyes and the other one with sky blue eyes. So when they have a baby, it's most likely that their baby is going to have brown eyes. So they couldn't really prove the theory just with observations like that. But Mendel did something different that we're going to analyze. He used peas, a type of plant that reproduce sexually and that produce many offspring. And here we have two parts that are very important. First of all, we have the stamens, which are the male part that contains sperm, and we have the carpel, that is the female part that contains eggs. Something interesting about this plant is that it self-pollinates, which means they create clones of themselves. Even though they reproduce sexually, they do not reproduce like humans, because in humans we need two different organisms in order to create a zygote and of course to give birth to a new baby. But what happens in this piece is that one plant has the male parts as well as the female parts. So that is why it is possible for the plant to actually pollinate itself and of course generate seeds from its own. But since the plants are going to be genetically equal to the parent, then they are known as clones. And here we have a picture of what one of these peas plants look like. And inside the flower, of course, there you will find the stamens and the carpels. Alright, so here is something interesting. The plant is basically the same. They are peas, but you can notice that they have a different color. So how is it related to Mendel's experiment? So Mendel decided to reproduce different pea plants to reproduce among each other. He would observe what will happen to the offspring of those plants with their different traits. Remember, traits are like characteristics that you can see. Like in this case, there is the purple trait and there is the white trait. Mendel prevented self-pollinating by cutting away the pollen, creating male parts. And remember that what he was studying was what will happen if he will combine the genes from two different plants. And of course, what will happen if the genes or the traits that these plants had were different. So he had to prevent that the natural process of the plant will take place by self-pollinating, because what he wants is to have a pollination among both plants, not only one of them. And he practiced something called cross-pollination. Cross-pollination is basically we take male the male sperm from the plants and we insert it in a different one. We inserted it in the ovas of another plant. So in this case, they are going to be crossing each other's genes and they're going to have an offspring of their own. And seeds were created and he studied their results. All right. So here is something interesting, and here is something that I was telling you about. So let's just go over it, and then I will explain you this picture and what it represents. So we have a term which is called hybridization. It means to cross two organisms with different traits, pretty much crossing purple and white colors. When mating and tracking one specific trait is known as monohybrid cross. So let's suppose that we only combine the purple trait. So the mother and the father are both purple. So it will be monohybrid cross. But once we start crossing two different genes, just like purple and white, it will be known as hybridization. And we have three generations that we need to analyze. We have the P generation, which are the original parents. We have the F1 generation, which is the first offspring. F2 generation, which is the second offspring, or the third generation. And right here we have what a dominant trait is. It is an allele that tends to be present. And a recessive trait is an allele that tends to be hidden. Alright, so now we are going to relate all of this in the picture that we have on the right. So, the P generation, which are the original parents, are the parents that you can see right at the top. In white. Okay, now let's analyze the following generation, which is the F1 generation. And just like you can notice, 100% of them are purple flowers. So, what happens to the Y gene? Why isn't it present? Well, right here we're going to analyze what a dominant trait is and what a recessive trait is. So, one more time. The dominant trait is an allele or a characteristic that is present. And just like you can see in the first generation, the one that is actually present is the purple one. And what is a recessive trait? Well, it is a characteristic that is there, but it is hidden. And just like you can notice, in the first generation, there is no white. Okay, but now what happens in the F2 generation, which is the second spring of the third generation? Just like you can notice, there is one white flower in there. So, this is related to recessive genes or recessive traits. Basically, what they do is that they are part of the genetic composition of the organism, but they are not, they do not appear regularly until a second generation, just like in this case. So, this was what the other scientists were not able to prove. Because, just like I mentioned in the example, how is it possible that if the babies had a mother with sky blue eyes, they don't have them and they only have brown eyes? Because the gene of the sky blue eyes is still in their organism. The difference is that it is not present because it is covered by the dominant gene of the brown eyes. Same thing happens in here. All right, and here we have a little bit more of a technical chart with information about what can happen in each one of the generations. Okay, let's start with the flower color, which is the example that we had before. So basically, in the first generation, we have purple and white. In the first generation, it was 100% purple. Remember, it doesn't mean that the plants do not have the white trait. They do. It's just that it is hidden. F2 generation, now we have 75% blue and 25% white. Okay? So, let's analyze another example. Let's go with the seed color. P1 generation, the seed color, we are combining yellow and green. In the F1 generation, we have 100% yellow. And the F2 generation, we have 75% yellow and 25% green. My question is, which one is the dominant trait and which one is the recessive trait? In the seed color, of course. So, the dominant trait will be yellow because it's one that in the first generation, it's present in 100%, and in the second generation, it's present in a 75%. And the recessive trait will be the green seed color because it has only a 25% appearance in both of the generations. It can not only be applied in plants, but it can be applied in humans as well. I'm going to give you my personal example, and my mother has green eyes, but my father has brown eyes. And you all are my students, so I'm pretty sure that you know that I have brown eyes. So I'm part of the F1 generation, and my parents will be the P generation. Okay, so what is going to happen if I have kids in the future? Well, even if my wife has brown eyes as well, but we both have the recessive gene for green eyes, there is a possibility of 25% that one of my kids is going to have a green eyes as well. So it's something that is possible in the future. Of course, basing all of this in the theory of Gregor Mendel and the Punnett squares that we are going to study later on as well. So what were Mendel's conclusions? Let's analyze them. Number one, different forms of a gene account for variations in the inherited trait. Yes, basically, two genes contribute to form a characteristic, but usually only one of them is present. Okay? Number two, an organism inherits two genes for each trait, one from each parent. You receive genes from your mother and you receive genes from your father. But even though you have both of their genes, it is possible that they only present one of their characteristics. Some alleles dominate over others for a given trait. This is known as the principle of dominance. So once you put a dominant gene and a recessive gene, the dominant gene is always going to dominate over the recessive gene. The two genes of a given trait segregate during gamete production. That is known as law of segregation, and gametes only receive one allele. Remember that gametes are sperm and ovas, both in male and female, of course. And what happens is that we have to remember the meiosis process. Remember that in the meiosis process, the DNA information or the genetic code is split apart. So you don't have identical cells, but you have different cells. So we also studied about how many chromosomes we have in our bodies. We have 46 in total. So 23 of those chromosomes have certain traits, and of course they have certain characteristics, as well as the other 23. And when they recombine, depending on the principle of dominance, one of them is going to be, or some of them are going to be present, and of course they are going to be covering some others. Alright, so where is the evaluation? So students have to read and summarize topic 3.03, especially focus on pages 5 to 7. At the end, they have to complete the assignment found in page 7 of this topic. So, just a little spoiler about what you are going to find in the assignment that you have in page number 7. You will find instructions and some documents that you have to download in page number 7, and they are going to ask you to interview around 20 people. But because of the situation we have right now, I don't want you to go outside of your house, okay? So just think about your relatives or think about people close to you like friends, and you can write down their information without the necessity of going out of your house and actually interviewing people, okay? One more time, don't go out of your house, just write down information about your family and your friends. They're going to ask about, if I'm not mistaken, the shape of your ears, or if you're tall or short, or information like that. It's something pretty simple that you can fill up in there. Okay? But it's very important that you include relevant information and, of course, real information. So the purpose of the worksheet that you are going to complete are going to be completed successfully. All right? So, and keep in mind that I would like you to read all of the instructions carefully so you can complete every one of the exercises that you have right there. If you have any questions, I will be available in Google Classroom and in WhatsApp. So thank you for coming one more time, and this is it for today's class. Goodbye, guys. I will be seeing you around next week.